I've spent the better part of my life studying successful people, and I mean really studying them. Not just reading about them or admiring them from a distance, but getting inside their minds, understanding what makes them tick, what separates them from everyone else. And what I discovered changed everything for me. It changed how I saw the world, how I saw myself, and most importantly, it showed me that success isn't some mysterious gift that only a few people are born with. It's a process. A very specific, very deliberate process that anyone can follow if they're willing to commit to it. Now, I want to talk to you today about something that Napoleon Hill discovered after spending 20 years studying the most successful people in America. 20 years. Can you imagine that? 2 decades of his life devoted to understanding one simple question: what makes successful people successful? And what he found was so profound, so life-changing, that it became the foundation for everything we know about achievement and personal success today. But here's what most people miss. They read the books, they nod their heads, they say, yes, that makes sense, and then they go right back to living exactly the way they were living before. Nothing changes. And the reason nothing changes is because they never truly commit. They never give themselves completely to the process. They dabble. They experiment. They try it out for a few days or maybe a few weeks, and when they don't see immediate results, they give up and move on to the next thing. I want to challenge you to do something different. I want you to commit to the next 90 days. Just 90 days. That's all I'm asking. 3 months of your life where you follow this process completely, without deviation, without excuses, without quitting when it gets hard. Because I promise you, it will get hard. Your mind will resist. Your old habits will try to pull you back. The people around you might not understand what number days you're doing. But if you can push through that, if you can stay committed for just these 90 days, you will be amazed at what happens in your life. You see, Napoleon Hill discovered something that most people never realize. He found that every single successful person he studied had one thing in common. It wasn't their education, though some were educated. It wasn't their background, because many came from poverty. It wasn't luck or connections or being in the right place at the right time. What they all had was a definiteness of purpose, a clear, burning desire for a specific goal, combined with an unwavering faith that they would achieve it no matter what obstacles appeared in their path. Think about that for a moment. A definiteness of purpose. Most people go through their entire lives without ever really deciding what they want. Oh, they have wishes, they have dreams. They say things like, I'd like to be successful, or I wish I had more money, or wouldn't it be nice if I could do what I love for a living? But wishing isn't the same as deciding. Wishing is passive. It's hoping that somehow, some way, life will just work out. But deciding, truly deciding with definiteness of purpose, that's active. That's taking control. That's saying, this is what I will achieve, and I will let nothing stop me. You see, most people wait for conditions to be perfect before they decide. They say, I'll start when I have more money, or I'll begin when I have more time, or I'll do it when the economy improves. But here's what they don't understand: the decision always comes first. The conditions follow the decision, not the other way around. Think about every major achievement in human history. Someone decided it was possible before there was any evidence it could be done. The Wright brothers decided humans could fly when everyone else said it was impossible. A young man named Walt Disney decided to build an empire of imagination when he was nearly bankrupt. These weren't wishes. These were decisions backed by unwavering commitment. When you make a real decision, something shifts in your universe. Your mind begins to work differently. Your subconscious mind, that powerful force we talked about earlier, accepts your decision as an order and begins working to make it reality. It starts noticing opportunities you would have missed. It begins connecting ideas that seemed unrelated. It gives you the courage to take actions you would have been too afraid to take before. But here's where most people stumble. They make a decision, and then when the first obstacle appears, they change their minds. They decide they want to start a business, but when the first customer says no, they interpret that as a sign it wasn't meant to be. They decide to transform their health, but when they face the first temptation or setback, they abandon their commitment. A real decision doesn't change when circumstances get difficult. In fact, That's when a real decision proves itself. That's when you discover whether you made a decision or just had a preference. I remember speaking with a man who told me he'd decided to become financially independent. I asked him what he was doing about it. He gave me a list of excuses. His job didn't pay enough, he had too many bills, the economy was uncertain. I said, "My friend, you haven't decided anything. You've simply wished for a different outcome while continuing the same behaviors." He didn't like hearing that, but 6 months later he came back to me. He said, "Earl, you were right." I went home that day angry, but I realized I'd been lying to myself. So I made a real decision. I stopped making excuses and started making changes. It hasn't been easy, but I'm already seeing results I never thought possible. That's the difference. A decision eliminates alternatives. When you decide, truly decide, you stop entertaining other options. You stop leaving yourself escape routes. You commit fully to the path you've chosen. And here's something beautiful about decisions. They compound. Every small decision you make in alignment with your goal reinforces your commitment. Every morning you wake up early as you decided, every time you do the work when you don't feel like it, every moment you choose discipline over comfort. These decisions stack on top of each other, building momentum that becomes unstoppable. Your life right now is the sum total of all the decisions you've made up to this point. If you don't like where you are, the beautiful truth is this: you can make a new decision right now, this very moment. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, right now. Because here's what I've learned after decades of studying human achievement. The people who wait for perfect conditions never start. They're like sailors who refuse to leave port until the weather's absolutely perfect. But you know what happens? They spend their entire lives at the dock, watching others sail by, convinced that someday the conditions will finally be right. But there's never a perfect time. Never. When I started this very program you're listening to, I didn't have ideal conditions. I had doubts. I had bills. I had people telling me it wouldn't work. But I started anyway. And that decision to begin imperfectly, uncertainly, changed everything. You see, action has a magical quality that thinking alone can never possess. When you move even just one small step, you create momentum. And momentum is like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts small, but it gathers force, picks up speed, becomes something much larger than that first push. I want you to think about your goal right now. Whatever it is. Maybe it's starting that business, writing that book, learning that skill, repairing that relationship. What's the smallest possible action you could take today? Not the grandest gesture, not the perfect first step, the smallest one. If you want to write a book, could you write one paragraph today? If you want to start a business, could you make one phone call? If you want to improve your health, could you take one walk around the block? That's all you need, one small action. Because that action proves something crucial to your subconscious mind. You're serious. You're not just another dreamer. You're a doer. And your mind, sensing this commitment, begins to align all its incredible power behind your goal. Now, I'm going to share something with you that might sound almost mystical, but I've seen it proven true thousands of times. When you take action toward a meaningful goal, the strangest thing happens. Opportunities begin appearing. Resources show up. People enter your life at exactly the right moment. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. Some call it luck. Some call it God. Some call it the law of attraction. I don't know what to call it, and frankly, I don't care what we call it. What matters is that it works. It's as reliable as gravity. But, and this is crucial, it only works when you're in motion. The universe, or God, or whatever you want to call this force, can't guide a parked car. You have to be moving. Even if you're moving slowly, even if you're not entirely sure of the direction. Movement is the key that unlocks everything else. I think about farmers I knew growing up. They didn't wait until they understood every variable about weather patterns and soil chemistry before planting their seeds. They planted. They trusted the process. They did their part, and then they let nature do its part. Some years were abundant, some years were lean, but the farmers who succeeded were the ones who planted every single season. Your life is your farm. Your thoughts are your seeds. But seeds don't grow in the packet. They've got to go into the soil. They need action. They need that commitment of being planted, of being put into the ground where they can take root and grow. And here's something else. Most people spend their entire lives preparing to begin. They read another book, take another course, wait for another certification, gather more information. And all of this can be good, but it can also be a sophisticated form of procrastination. There comes a point where you know enough to start. You may not know everything. You probably shouldn't know everything, because part of growth is learning along the way, but you know enough. Deep down, you know you're ready. That voice inside telling you to wait? That's fear disguised as prudence. And here's what I've learned about fear and timing. Fear will always give you a reason to wait. Next month, next year, when you have more money, when you have more experience, when the conditions are perfect. But perfect conditions are a myth. They don't exist. You know what does exist? This moment, right now. Think about the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, December 17th, 1903. The wind was harsh that day. The conditions weren't ideal. They'd already faced failure after failure. And there were other inventors, better funded, with more resources, racing toward the same goal. By every logical measure, they should have waited. Refined their design, secured more backing. But they didn't. They flew 12 seconds, 120 feet, and they changed the world forever. Now imagine if they'd waited for perfect conditions. Someone else would have that place in history. That's the thing about opportunity. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It appears, briefly, like a door opening in a long hallway, and you either walk through it or you watch it close. I see this pattern everywhere. The musician who writes songs in secret for years, waiting to be good enough to share them. Meanwhile, someone with half their talent but twice their courage is building an audience, getting feedback, improving in public. The entrepreneur who spends years planning the perfect business, while competitors launch, learn, and adapt in real time. The writer who endlessly revises chapter 1, never reaching chapter 2, never finishing the book. Perfectionism isn't about excellence. It's about protection. It's a shield we hold up to avoid criticism, rejection, failure. But here's the paradox. That same shield that protects you from failure also blocks you from success. You want to know the real secret? The one successful people understand but rarely talk about? They didn't start when they were ready. They became ready by starting. Every expert was once a beginner who refused to stay a beginner. Every master was once a student who kept showing up. Success isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and moving forward anyway. And let me tell you something else about fear. It lies. It tells you you're not ready, but what it really means is you're not guaranteed to succeed. And that's true. You're not. But you're also not guaranteed to fail. You're simply guaranteed an outcome, and most outcomes, even the ones we call failures, teach us something valuable. They move us forward. I think about Thomas Edison and those 1,000 failed attempts at the light bulb. A reporter asked him how it felt to fail so many times. Edison said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's not just optimism, that's understanding. He knew that every failure was actually data, information, a stepping stone disguised as a setback. This is how growth actually works. Not in straight lines, not in perfect progressions, but in spirals. You try something, you learn, you adjust, you try again, and gradually, through accumulated experience, you develop judgment, skill, and confidence. But only if you start, only if you give yourself something to learn from. The people who wait for certainty never start, because certainty doesn't come before action, it comes after. You don't become confident and then take action. You take action, and that builds confidence. You don't find clarity and then move forward. You move forward, and that creates clarity. And this is what separates those who keep moving through life with momentum from those who stay stuck in endless loops of analysis. The person who acts doesn't need all the answers first. They discover the answers by moving. Think about learning to swim. You can read every book about swimming. You can watch Olympic swimmers glide through the water with perfect form. You can memorize the mechanics of the stroke, the breathing patterns, the way the body should rotate. But until you actually get in the water and start moving your arms and legs, you don't really know how to swim. The clarity comes from the doing, not from the thinking about doing. I've watched people spend years preparing to start. They're gathering information, waiting for the perfect moment, trying to eliminate every possible risk before they begin. And meanwhile, someone else with half their knowledge but twice their willingness to act has already failed 3 times, learned from those failures, and is now succeeding. Now, here's what happens when you start taking action without perfect clarity. You make mistakes, absolutely, but those mistakes become your education. They teach you things no book or course ever could. They show you what works in reality, not just in theory. I remember talking to a man who wanted to start a business. He spent 2 years researching, planning, perfecting his business plan. 2 full years. And when I asked him why he hadn't started yet, he said he didn't feel ready. He didn't have complete clarity on how it would all work out. Meanwhile, a friend of his with a similar idea had launched 6 months earlier. She made plenty of mistakes. She had to adjust her pricing, change her marketing approach, even pivot her entire business model once. But after those same 2 years, she had a thriving business with real customers and real revenue. She got her clarity by doing, by testing, by learning in real time what actually worked. The perfection you're waiting for doesn't exist. The complete roadmap you think you need isn't coming. But here's what is available to you right now, the next step. And the next step is always clear enough. You want to write a book? The next step isn't figuring out every chapter, it's writing 1 page today. You want to get in shape? The next step isn't designing the perfect workout program. It's putting on your shoes and going for a walk. You want to change careers? The next step isn't having the entire transition mapped out. It's updating your resume or reaching out to one person in that field. The next step is always visible if you're willing to look at what's directly in front of you instead of straining to see the entire staircase. And here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you take that next step, the step after that becomes visible, and then the one after that. The path reveals itself as you walk it. But it only reveals itself to those who are walking, not to those who are standing still, waiting for the fog to clear completely. You know what else happens when you take action? You build something more valuable than clarity. You build proof. Proof to yourself that you can do this. Proof that you're capable of moving through uncertainty. Proof that you don't need perfect conditions to make progress. Every small action is a vote of confidence in yourself. Every time you move forward, despite not having all the answers, you're telling yourself a story about who you are. You're saying, I'm the kind of person who moves forward. I'm the kind of person who figures things out. I'm the kind of person who doesn't need permission or perfect conditions to start. And over time, that story becomes your identity. That identity shapes everything you do. Because you're no longer waiting for life to give you clarity. You're creating clarity through action, through movement, through the willingness to step into the unknown and discover what's there. And here's what happens when you begin to create that clarity. You stop looking for permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect certainty. Because you realize that certainty isn't found in planning, it's built in doing. Every time you act, you're gathering data. Every time you move forward, you're learning what works and what doesn't. And that information is infinitely more valuable than any amount of sitting still and theorizing. Think about a child learning to walk. They don't wait until they've studied balance, until they've analyzed biomechanics, until they're absolutely sure they won't fall. They stand up, they wobble, they fall down, and then they get back up and try again, and again, and again. Until one day walking becomes second nature. They didn't think their way into walking, they acted their way into it. And that's exactly how we discover who we're becoming. Not through endless self-analysis, but through trial, through error, through the courage to move before we're ready. Most people reverse this process. They want to feel confident before they act. They want to feel certain before they commit. They want to feel like they know who they are before they step into anything new. But confidence doesn't create action. Action creates confidence. You become certain by doing the thing you're uncertain about. You discover your identity by living into it, not by thinking about it. I've watched people spend years trying to find themselves, as if their true self is hiding somewhere, waiting to be discovered like a lost treasure. But you don't find yourself. You create yourself. You build yourself through the choices you make, the actions you take, the challenges you face and overcome. Your identity isn't static, it's dynamic, constantly being shaped by what you do and how you respond to the world around you. And when you understand this, when you really internalize that you're not discovering a fixed identity, but creating an evolving one, everything changes. Because now failure isn't a verdict on who you are. It's just feedback on what you tried. Now, rejection isn't a statement about your worth. It's just information about fit, about timing, about what needs to adjust. You're no longer fragile, because you're no longer attached to a single outcome defining you. You're resilient, because you know that every result is just one more piece of data helping you build who you're becoming. This is the shift that separates people who grow continuously from people who stay stuck. The stuck ones believe they need to protect their identity, defend it, prove it. The growing ones understand that identity is meant to expand, to evolve, to be tested and refined. They're not afraid of being wrong, because being wrong doesn't threaten who they are, it informs who they're becoming. And you can make that shift right now. Not tomorrow, not when you're ready, but now. You make it by choosing one area where you've been waiting for clarity and committing to action instead. Maybe it's that business idea you've been researching for months without launching. Maybe it's that creative project you've been planning without starting. Maybe it's that conversation you've been rehearsing without having. Whatever it is, the shift happens the moment you stop preparing and start doing. The difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't knowledge, it's action. And I know that sounds almost too simple, but that's what makes it so powerful. We convince ourselves we need more information, more certainty, more perfect conditions. But think about every significant achievement in your life. Did you wait until you felt completely ready? Or did you move forward despite the uncertainty? I'll tell you what I've observed. The people who achieve extraordinary things aren't necessarily the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who develop the habit of moving toward their goals, even when they're uncertain, especially when they're uncertain, because they understand something crucial. Clarity comes through action, not before it. When you start that business, you don't have all the answers, but each action you take reveals the next step. Each conversation opens a door you didn't know existed. Each small effort compounds into something remarkable. You learn by doing, not by endlessly preparing to do. And here's what happens when you make this shift from waiting to acting. Your entire relationship with fear changes. See, fear doesn't disappear when you take action, but it transforms. Instead of being this vague, overwhelming dread that paralyzes you, it becomes specific, manageable. You're no longer afraid of everything that might go wrong. You're dealing with actual challenges, real problems that have real solutions. There's tremendous power in specificity. When your fears are abstract and your dreams are someday maybe fantasies, you're stuck. But the moment you commit to a specific action, everything sharpens into focus. That business idea becomes a business plan. That creative project becomes actual work in progress. That relationship you want to improve becomes a conversation you're actually having. And you know what else happens? You start to build what I call evidence of capability. Every small action you complete becomes proof that you're someone who follows through. You're creating a track record with yourself. And that's perhaps the most valuable thing you can build, because it changes your identity. When you see yourself as someone who takes action, who moves toward their goals consistently, even imperfectly, you start to expect more from yourself. Your standards rise. Not in a punishing way, but in an empowering way. You begin to think, if I could do that, what else is possible? I've seen this transformation countless times. Someone takes one bold action, something they've been avoiding for months or years, and suddenly everything shifts. Not because that one action solved all their problems, but because it broke the spell of inaction. It proved that movement is possible, that change is real, that they have more power than they realized. Think about the areas of your life where you feel stuck right now. I'm willing to bet that in most cases, you actually know what needs to be done. You don't need more information, you need more courage. You need to trust that imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time. This is where discipline becomes freedom. I know we often think of discipline as restriction, as sacrifice, but real discipline is liberating because it closes the gap between who you are and who you want to be. Every time you do what you said you would do, you're building trust with yourself. You're proving you're reliable. And that self-trust becomes the foundation for everything else. Think about the most reliable person you know, the person you'd call in an emergency, the person who shows up when they say they will, the person whose word actually means something. What makes them that way? It's not that they're perfect. It's not that they never make mistakes. It's that they've built a pattern of keeping their commitments. They've proven over time that they can be counted on. Now, here's the thing most people miss. You can become that person for yourself. You can become the person you trust completely, the person you rely on without question, the person whose word to yourself carries the same weight as a promise to someone you love. And it starts small. It starts with the little promises. Wake up when the alarm goes off. Do the workout you planned. Make the phone call you've been avoiding. Write the page you committed to. Each one builds the foundation. I remember years ago, I made a decision to write every single day, no matter what. Not when I felt inspired, not when I had time. Every single day. And there were days when it was hard. Days when I had nothing to say. Days when every word felt like pulling teeth. But I did it anyway. And you know what happened? After about 6 months, something shifted. Writing became part of who I was, not something I had to force myself to do. The habit had taken over. But more importantly, I had proven something to myself. I had shown myself that when I make a commitment, I keep it. That self-trust spilled over into everything else. It became easier to commit to other things because I knew I would follow through. That's the power of self-trust. It compounds. Every kept promise makes the next one easier. Every followed-through commitment strengthens the foundation. You're not just building habits, you're building character. You're building the kind of person who does what they say they'll do. And here's what happens when you become that person. Other people start to trust you differently too. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because your internal integrity shows up in everything you do. When you trust yourself, others sense it. They see someone who's solid, someone who's reliable, someone who has their act together. But it goes even deeper than that. When you trust yourself, you stop second-guessing every decision. You stop lying awake at night wondering if you made the right choice. You stop constantly seeking validation from others, because you know that whatever you decide, you'll handle it. You'll follow through. You'll make it work. This is the secret that confident people understand. It's not that they have all the answers. It's not that they never feel doubt. It's that they trust themselves to figure it out. They trust themselves to handle whatever comes. They trust themselves to keep moving forward even when things get hard. And that trust doesn't come from positive thinking, or affirmations, or visualizations. It comes from evidence. It comes from doing what you said you would do, over and over again, until your track record speaks for itself. So if you want to build genuine confidence, start keeping score. Start making small commitments and following through. Start proving to yourself that you're reliable. Start building that foundation of self-trust, one kept promise at a time. Because here's the truth, you already know what you need to do. You've always known. The question isn't what to do. The question is whether you'll trust yourself enough to actually do it. Because here's what happens when you finally trust that inner voice. Here's what changes. You stop looking outside yourself for permission. You stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to want what you want. You stop apologizing for the dreams that keep you awake at night. And the moment you do that, everything shifts. I've watched this transformation happen hundreds of times. Someone finally decides to trust themselves. They take that first step toward what they've always known they should do. And suddenly, people they need start appearing. Resources they couldn't find before suddenly become available. Doors that seemed locked swing open effortlessly. It's not magic, it's not luck. It's what happens when you stop fighting against yourself and start moving with the grain of your own truth. Think about water finding its way downhill. It doesn't struggle, it doesn't second guess. It simply flows in the direction it's meant to go, and it's unstoppable because it's not working against its own nature. That's what happens when you trust yourself. But most people never get there. They keep waiting, they keep doubting, they keep asking everyone else what they should do with their one wild, precious life. And the tragedy is, deep down, they already know. You know what lights you up, you know what drains you, you know which relationships feed your soul and which ones slowly diminish it. You know what work makes you feel alive and what work makes you feel like you're dying a slow death. You know. But knowing and trusting are two different things. See, you can know something intellectually and still not trust it enough to act on it. You can know you should leave that job, start that business, write that book, have that difficult conversation, make that move. You can know it with absolute certainty. But if you don't trust yourself enough to act on what you know, nothing changes, and this is where most people get stuck. They've spent so long listening to everyone else that they've forgotten how to trust their own inner compass. They've collected so many opinions, so much advice, so many competing voices that they can't hear their own anymore. So they freeze, they wait. They hope that somehow, magically, the path will become clearer. But it won't. The path becomes clear when you start walking it, not before. You don't need more information. You don't need more time. You don't need more certainty. You need to trust yourself enough to take the first step. And here's the beautiful thing about that first step. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be right. It just has to be honest. It just has to be true to what you actually want, not what you think you should want. Because once you take that first honest step, the next one reveals itself, and then the next, and before you know it, you're walking a path that feels like coming home to yourself. I've seen people transform their entire lives by finally trusting that quiet voice inside them, the one that whispers what they really want, the one that shows them what they're actually capable of, the one that's been there all along, waiting patiently for them to listen. And when they finally do, when they finally trust themselves enough to act on what they've always known, they stop living someone else's definition of success. They stop trying to fit into a life that was never meant for them. They stop wondering what their life could have been, because they're finally living it,